All right, so this is what we're going to be building this week. We're going to be building an app in Swift that will have a table and will have a web view, and we're going to include a popover view that will display a popover over our table view cell that's been clicked. So we have here our home page. It's like a little game ticketing agent. So what you'll do is first maybe Google search some teams. So we'll have our little web view come up with our activity indicator view spinning and showing us Google, right? Have a little back button, have buy tickets. This is our wonderful table view, which happens to be missing one icon, which we'll fix later. And for example, Leafs, if I click on that, this little popover will come up that says order here, right? You can expand upon this little popover, have little text fields like, name, quantity, credit card number, a little submit button. You can add that in for the popover later on. You click away, it goes away. Click on J's, for example, same order here, popover appears as well. So that's our goal for this particular application. So first thing we'll do is start off with a new project. So under Xcode, we'll do like a file new project. All right. And it'll be iOS single view application. And I'll call this one game ticket agent. And language is Swift. Universal device. Uncheck those checkboxes. We don't need this for our application here. And go ahead and hit next. And give it a home. All right, so let's first start by organizing our files into separate groups. I'm just going to add a few groups here. So I'm going to right click or two finger click, say new group. And this will be view controllers. Next one, special classes. New group. And storyboards. And finally, new group, images. All right, so those will be the groups that we have. Just going to move the code over to those specific groups. And I'm going to move the assets file over to images. We'll talk about assets later on in the exercise. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the UI, so with the storyboards, and get all of the things we need for all of the storyboards in place. So starting off with launch screen, I'm just going to put a little loading keyword, so put a label up. And increase the font a bit. Change the color to something nicer. All right, so we'll have loading on our launch screen. Moving over to main storyboard. Starting off on the home page, we'll put another label. And I'll put the title of the app. So we'll say Game Ticket Agent. And put a couple of buttons. And copy and paste that button to keep the sizes. So first button, we'll just say buy tickets. Second button will be search teams. Now, what we want to do next is bring in 2 more screens. So we will need to bring in 2 more view controllers. But before we do that, I think I'm going to create those view controller objects first, so the code files, to support each of those screens. So if that's our home page, I can go to view controllers, right click or 2-finger click and say new file. And it'll be iOS, Cocoa Touch class. I'll hit next. And this will be a subclass of UI view controller, and this first one will be called Web View Controller, because we're going to do our web view and Google search in that view controller. Language is Swift. Give it a home. All right, so we have Web View Controller. And then we're going to do the same thing. New file. iOS Cocoa Touch class. Hit next. This one will be called Teams View Controller. And give it a home. So we have here 3 view controllers in total. We're going to need a 4th one later on. And so we'll add that when we get to that point. That'll be for the popover. So going back to my storyboard, what I'm going to do is drag over 2 more view controllers. And now I can first off subclass each of them. So going to my 3rd inspector, which is my identity inspector. Change class to, I'll make this one the web view controller. And then I'm going to drag another one. Probably stick it below. And this one will be our Teams view controller. Now we can create my segues right away. So I have my web view controller up here, my Teams view controller over there. Let's going to zoom out so you can see a bit better. So I'm going to connect buy tickets to my Teams view controller. So control drag. Present modally. Connect my search teams. Control drag to web view controller. Present modally. All right. So I have my navigation mostly complete. What I want to do now is add all of my widgets. So I'm going to add my nav bars to each of these with a back button. So I'll go for a navigation bar. Throwing it up there. And this title will be, there it is. So title will be Google search. The nav bar for the Teams view controller below will be buy tickets. Now we'll add our back buttons. So bar button item. That text will be back. And I think I'll have to undo that. Something went wrong. There. So I'll try that bar button item again. better. And this one will be back as well. All right. So for the buy tickets, since it's just the table view, we can start down here and drag our table view over. We're going to do the table last, or second last, before the popover. So looking for a table, in particular table view, drag that table view over. And remember to connect its data source and delegate to the view controller. So making sure table view is highlighted, highlighting the connections inspector, data source and delegates right there, so drag those over to the yellow circle. So again, to recap, the purpose of that is so that it invokes the special methods we're going to create inside the view controller object to support the table. So remember, we do all of our tables in code. All right. So that's our table. Now I can focus our energy on the web view. So we're going to search for a web view, drag that over, and stretch it out. And put an activity indicator view. And I think I'll enlarge it, change its color. So large white, go with red again. And so now, making sure the web view is highlighted, switching over to Connections Inspector, Connect Delegate to the view controller, just like we did for the table view. So we can get the two methods, did start load and did finish load, to fire when we needed to fire. All right. So now we need to get the back button up and running. And we'll connect up the back button to the exit icon last, well, before we're ready to run. But we'll start with the connecting, well, writing the code for the back button. So going to viewcontroller.swift, we'll create that little action here. So it's an IB action. Func, call it unwind to this view controller. And what's important is the argument we pass into this method, which will be called segue, but extending a UI storyboard segue. So that's the important part. So making sure that we're extending UI storyboard segue. And in our case, we'll just make it an empty method. All right. So let's switch back to the storyboard, connect up the back button, and just make sure that we have our screen flow working properly. So making sure we put our mouse over the back button, hit the control, drag to the exit icon. We'll have unwind to this view controller. Let's do the same thing again down for the Teams view controller. So making sure we're mousing over the back button, holding down control, dragging to exit, letting go, unwind to this view controller. And that's enough for us to run. Remember that our screen says view as iPhone 7. So we want to choose a simulator iPhone 7 right there. And let it run. All right, so we have our home page, we got our loading page come up, going to buy tickets. And of course this is going to crash because we connected data source and delegate, but we didn't connect the support methods. Right? And so if I go back and I run it again for the web view, click on search teams, we'll have nothing appear, but at least we're ready to write the code to support that web view. And our back button works. Okay, so now let's switch over to our web view and get that web view up and running. So we'll start with the easiest thing first, web view controller.swift. And our first goal now is to declare our variables. So we're going to say at IB outlet. We'll say week var web view extends a UI web view question mark. And do the same thing for activity indicator. So at IB outlet week var activity extends UI activity indicator view. So UI activity indicator view. There's a bunch of activities here. We'll make sure we get the right one with a question mark. All right. Now in Objective-C, when we want to bring in those interfaces or protocols, we had to use the angle brackets. All right. But in Swift, we don't. We use a comma. And it kind of looks like you're extending multiple classes when you do this. So if I want to bring in UI WebView delegate, so I'm going to say class WebView controller extends UI view controller, comma, UI WebView delegate. And that is the delegate we're bringing in. So it looks like I'm extending two classes. Right? Remember, there's only single inheritance in this language. All right. So let's start with WebView did load and get our website to appear. So inside view did load. So we're going to say let URL address equal URL, passing in a string, and our string will just be https://www.google.ca. So remember, we can't use any HTTP websites because it'll complain unless we set the exception in our info.plist file. So that's URL address. Next one is our URL request object. So URL address, the URL object itself contains the location of where we're going to. Now we need a object that will manage the transfer, data transfer to and from the actual web server that has the URL, well, the website that we need. So we'll say let URL equal URL request, passing in URL, which is our URL address object above. Then finally, like Picard, make it so we're going to say WebView question mark dot load request, passing in URL as URL request. Now it's got a little complaint there just above, so we're saying URL address. Let's see what it wants. It wants us to unwrap. It wants to have an optional there. So we'll let Xcode tell us that it wants an exclamation mark. So we'll say, okay, sure, have your exclamation mark. And now we have enough to get the web view to display. Before we get it to display, let's create our support methods so that we can get the activity indicator turning on and turning off. So just above that, I'm going to create the two support methods. So func Webview did start load. And so inside of here, we're going to say activity question mark dot start animating. And we'll say activity question mark dot is hidden to equal false. Then we're going to do the same thing for did finish load. So func Webview did finish load, passing in activity question mark stop animating. Activity question mark is hidden to equal true. Right, so the next step is to connect up our storyboard. And if we highlight the yellow circle for our WebView controller, we'll see activity connected to the activity indicator. And WebView to the WebView. And now we can run it. Let's go to Search Teams. And there we go. All right, now that we got the WebView up and running, our next step is to get our table up and running. So we're going to switch over to Teams View Controller. And what we're going to do is start creating our variables. So what we're going to do is declare a few arrays. So first one, var teams is equal to jays, leafs, raptors, marlies, and fc. Now, what's interesting is that, so we just declared an array. We're going to use this array to be the key for our next two dictionaries that we're going to declare. So jays, leafs, and raptors, and marlies, and fc, as they're spelled, we're going to use those as our keys for the next two arrays that we're about to declare. All right. So we'll declare our next one, which will be a dictionary, which will be var number of tickets. Now it's a dictionary, so we're going to extend it to be a string for our key and an int for our value. We're just going to make up some tickets remaining values. All right. So we're going to set it equal to jays, spelled exactly the same as the jays above. We're just going to make it up to be like 51 tickets remaining. And then leafs, again, spelt exactly as above. We'll just say they have like 59 tickets remaining. Raptors, we'll say, 56 remaining. And then marlies, we'll have 69 tickets remaining. And finally, FC will have 87 tickets remaining. All right. So that's our second array, or dictionary in this case. Now we're going to create one more dictionary. This will be for our images, but we haven't brought images into the project yet. So I'll just start off with saying var, call it logos. It will be a dictionary where we're going to have a string for the key and a string for the value and hit the equal sign there and pause that. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to bring in our images into the project. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring in our images. So I have this images folder already there, ready to go. And what I'm going to do is two-finger click on images, go add files to game ticket agent. Now it's assumed you've already unzipped the zip file of images on the course website, or you can just find the logos on the internet and bring them in and name them accordingly. And so I'm just going to navigate to where my images are. And add them. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a command click to click on all 5 images that I want to bring in. And before I hit add, just a reminder, expand options and make sure copy items if needed is checked so that the images get copied directly into your Xcode project, right? Otherwise they're in some random location on your hard drive, and if you were to share this Xcode project somewhere else, then you will not have a complete project. Those files will be missing. So make sure copy items if needed is checked, and we'll hit add. All right. And so we have our 5 images rather. Now, we could just use these images as is, put their file names into our array, but we're going to introduce something here, like an assets file. So you'll notice that there's a file here called assets.xc assets. So these are asset files. They're used to organize your images a lot better than we have been in the past. So we have all of these image files here. We're just going to put them in temporarily, and we're going to take them out after. So let's look at this assets file, .xc assets. And you'll see here that there's space for an app icon already. And you'll see that there's different dimensions possible for the app icon. What we're going to do is we're going to bring in a new file for our asset file for these images here. So I'm going to right click or two-finger click and go new file. And under iOS, I'm going to scroll down and look for asset catalog. Right? There's a bunch of other stuff available as well as you scroll down for exploring, but we just want asset catalog. And we're going to hit next. And I'm going to call this my logo assets. Sorry, logo catalog. And it'll autocomplete with the file extension. And so we created an asset file called logocatalog.xc assets, and it's empty. So now I'm just going to drag each of these images over. So I'm going to make sure that logo catalog is highlighted. It's empty. There's 2 approaches. I can just hit the plus sign below and say new image set. But instead of that, I'm just going to leave this highlighted and just drag over fc.png, jays.jpg, leafs.png, marlies.png, raptors.jpg. And I'm going to delete all of these, but I'm just going to remove reference, not delete them, not move them to trash, but just remove reference for all of these. So I no longer need to worry about all of these extra image files. All right, so now images just has my assets files. And so look at what I have here under logo catalog. I have your FC, Jays, Leafs, Marlies, Raptors, and you see my logos are there. And notice that it has 1x, 2x, and 3x. So it's assumed that as you're working with a graphics artist, that they'll produce different resolutions of that same image. Now, it's not to say that if you use this image, it's going to crash on an iPad or some other higher resolution device. It'll just look more grainy and pixelated. It won't look as nice on a better screen, on a bigger and better screen. So that's why we have 1x. So 1x would probably represent like the iPhone 5, 4, maybe the small iPhone 6. The 2x probably represents the 6 Plus, the 7, 7 Plus, maybe a small iPad, right? 7-inch iPad. And then 3x would probably represent the larger, higher res screens like the iPad 9.7 inch and the iPad 12.1 inch, right? So those larger iPad, larger screen devices. So you have the option. You're going to probably just create the exact same image, but just higher resolution for this and for this. And you'll do the same for all of your images as you want to support the different screen sizes available to you. All right. So having said that, we have our images. And notice the names, FC, Jays, Leafs, Marlies, and Raptors, because we're going to use these names in our dictionary now. So now I'm going to switch back to TeamsViewController.swift and finish off my dictionary there. So I'm going to say it's equal to Jays, which will be the key for Jays. And actually, let's let it autocomplete. Let me show you what just happened here. Hit enter, and that's my Jays image. And I'll say Leafs, colon, start typing in Leafs, and notice that the image comes up. Raptors will represent Raptors. And notice that the image icon comes up. Marlies. Start typing in Marlies, that icon. And finally, FC is represented by FC. And there's our dictionary for our images based on the assets file. All right, so we have our dictionaries created. Now, what we need to do is start bringing in our table methods. To do our table methods, we need to bring in those two protocols or interfaces, just like we did for the Webview. So we go to our class declaration. So class Teams View Controller extends UI View Controller, comma, UI Table View Data Source, comma, UI Table View Delegate. So it looks like I'm extending 3 classes when I'm not. And let's look at our error here. Because we are bringing in the icons, we need to change this to be a UI image. So that's another correction as well. There. So that should satisfy the dictionary there. So notice that we have a dictionary of string UI image. All right, so let's start into declaring our methods. So just below it, I'm going to say func. Now, in Objective-C, I would have said func, table view, but it's kind of painful because all of the methods I have are all over the place. It's actually easier if I just start with the method I need, which is number of rows in section. All right, and I'm just going to return the length of one of the arrays. So I'll return the length of teams, teams.count. So that tells me how many cells are going to be in the table. Next, height. So I'm going to say height for row at, and return, I'm just going to hard code to 60 pixels. Next, I'm going to create, so func cell for row at index path. And I'm going to pause there with this file. Because what we want to do now is we want to use a customized cell. And that'll be the next step. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a new file. I'll put it under special classes. So I'm going to right click and say new file. And it will be iOS Cocoa Touch class. And it'll be a subclass of UI table view cell. And I'm going to call this site cell. And of course, language is Swift. So we'll call it site cell. And give it a home. All right. And what we'll do first is we'll recap what site cell is all about. And noting the methods here. So we know that site cell extends table view cell or UI table view cell. There's two methods that are brought in by default. So there's awake from nib. So awake from nib is a special method similar to viewDidLoad. It's executed earlier than viewDidLoad. It's executed very early. And then there's set selected. So set selected will execute upon selecting that cell. So it's good for maybe modifying the font, maybe changing the font red or increasing the font size or anything like that. So that's what it's good for. Now we're going to actually create two other methods instead that will support the creation of this cell. So the first one we're going to create will be our constructor. And the second one we'll create will be for laying it out on the screen. So X, Y, location, width, and height location of our items. Now the items we're going to display in this cell are two labels and an image view. So we're going to say let team name equal UI label. Now when I do it this way, I'm instantiating UI label right off the bat. So I don't have to worry about instantiating later on. I'm going to say let tickets available equal UI label instantiated as well. And then finally, let logo equal UI image view. All right. So we have here team name, ticket available, logo as our three items that are going to appear on the screen. I got to fix that letter M. There we go. Now it should turn purple. There we go. So we have here our three items. They're instantiated, so we're ready to use them right off the bat. So no need to worry about instantiating them in our constructor. So moving on, we're going to bring in our constructor. Now note the keyword override is used to override a method that exists in the parent class. So we're going to say override init. And notice that it automatically completes for me. So init style. In Objective-C, we call this init with style. Right? Now we're just calling it init and then style and reuse identifier as the arguments. So now what we're going to do here in init is we're going to do all of our configurations that we would do typically for a label or an image view in the attributes inspector. So we're skipping over the instantiation part. We'll start with team name, the label, and we'll start with text alignment. So team name dot text alignment is equal to ns text alignment dot left. And then team name dot font is equal to UI font. We'll just use the system font. System font. Sorry, we'll make it bold. Bold system font of size. So we'll set this one to be like 30 pixels. So remember that our cell size is 60 pixels. That's what we defined in height for row at index path. Next thing, we'll say the background color. So we'll say team name dot background color is equal to UI color dot clear. There's a reason why I do that. We'll talk about it in a sec. Team name dot text color is equal to UI color, make it black. All right. Now the reason I'm doing clear color for this label for the background is because you may want to put a nice background image underneath your table view, and you want to have that nice background image be portray through the table and make it look really slick. But what will happen is, because your UI label, the background color of your UI label by default is white. So you'll actually see white boxes with text on top of it for each label that appears in the table. So that's why I like to go ahead and make the background color. Even though we're not going to put a background image in this exercise, I like to actually add that in as part of my creation of cells. All right, so that's team name. Next thing we'll do is we'll do the same thing for tickets available. So tickets available dot text alignment. Again, left justified, so ns text alignment dot left. Team name dot font equals UI font, bold, system font of size. So this will make it small, make it 16. Yeah, so correction there, tickets available, thank you. There. And then tickets available dot background color, UI color dot clear, tickets available dot text color, UI color, make it blue. Now there's no configuration needed for UI image. What we're going to do is, because UI image is really configured by adding the image in, so we don't have to worry anything about it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start adding in our items to the current view. So first thing we'll do is we'll call the super constructor. So we'll say super init and pass in the two arguments from our constructor above. So UI table view cell style and the style and reuse identifier. So style, we'll just pass in style. Reuse identifier, we'll pass in reuse identifier. And now we'll add the three views. So we'll say content view dot add subview. And notice the argument is UI view, which tells you that all of our items, all of our widgets, UI label, UI image view, table view, everything is a child object of UI view. So I'm going to pass in team name. Do the same thing, content view dot add subview, passing in tickets available. And content view add subview, passing in logo. And that's it for our constructor. All right, so we got our constructor in place. Next step is to get our next method, which is layout subviews, which basically is where we depict where the X, Y, width, and height values are for all three items: tickets, available, team name, and logo. So just below it, I'm going to add another method, but you'll notice that there's a little error dot. Right, it's a little error dot. And that's because when we do that, it says, we actually need one more constructor. So this is init with coder. So we'll just let it fix it for us. So we'll hit enter. Let it put in its default code. It's good enough. We actually don't need it. We're not going to use it. So let's make Xcode happy by bringing in this init with coder constructor. All right. So it's auto-generated. Let it do its thing. All right. So let's bring in layout subviews. So we're going to say override func layout subviews. And we have three items here. So we're going to manipulate the frame variable of all three items. So remember, the frame variable is a CG rect object that depicts X, Y, width, and height. So if I start off with team name dot frame is equal to, and in the past it used to be CG rect make. So now we just say CG rect. So in Objective-C it's still CG rect make, but if I type in CG rect with an opening bracket, I can scroll down and look for X, Y, width, and height. And pass in, and the values that I've already come up with already in the past, so you can just follow along with these same values. So 100 for X, Y will be 5, width will be 300, height will be 30. And then tickets available dot frame is equal to CG rect. And I'll go same thing, pull out that X, Y, width, and height, and just pass in as 100, 40, 300, and 20. Then logo dot frame is equal to CG rect. Going for the X, Y, width, and height. This one will be 5, 5, 45, 45. All right, and that's our site cell object. We have enough here to get started and display our cells, having these 3 items. All right, now that we have our site cell in place, we're going to move back to Teams View Controller.swift, and we're going to use it. Now in Objective-C, the idea was that we would write this code in such a way that we would first check to see if we were in one of 2 scenarios. Because this method gets called over and over and over again, what we're going to do is we would have checked to have seen if we were in the second scenario where all the cells have been loaded on the screen and we're just swiping and a cell is leaving the screen and needs to be repurposed. And if that's not the case, it'll return nil, and we will then have to instantiate a brand new cell because it'll be in the first scenario where it's like, it's a new table appearing on the screen and all the cells are being instantiated to appear on the screen. So we would have done that in an if statement. But here in Swift, they're trying to reduce those style of if statements. So what they've come up with is a longer line of code that uses the double question mark optional as a way to try and reduce that. So what we're going to do here is declare our table cell. So we'll say let table cell extending site cell equal table view dot DQ reusable cell with identifier, and that's a familiar method from Objective-C. We're going to make up a cell identifier, just call it cell. All right, so its first step is we're going to DQ reusable cell with identifier. Then we're going to say as site cell, just to cast it back. So that's the first step, is that we're going to just try and pull out a cell and see if this is the scenario where you are swiping the table and a cell is leaving the screen and you just have to repurpose that. So this will return nil if this is just brand new table instantiating cells that are appearing on the screen. So that's the first part of this line of code. Now, what if it does return nil? Well, we should have a backup plan for if it returns nil. So that's where the double question mark comes in. All right, so we throw in the double question mark, and now we can instantiate. So now we can say site cell. And pass in, and look, it's letting it autocomplete, so we'll just pass in that second constructor. Style will be UI table view cell style dot default. Second argument, reuse identifier, the same cell for our reuse identifier. Now, a pretty long line of code, but this used to be an if-else statement in Objective-C. So we've compacted it down to one long line of code. And just to recap, we are first going to dequeue, try and see if we can get a cell that already exists that's leaving the screen that we can repurpose with new information. And if that's not the case, where you have actually created a new table, you're loading on the screen, and you have to instantiate all the cells for your screen, for your table, you're going to then just instantiate that site cell. So that's what's going on there. Now, once you have that in place, you can go ahead and populate all of your items on the cell for that individual cell that's loading up. So going back to our array, there's a reason why we have teams, Jays, Leafs, Raptors, Marlies, and FC. This Jays, Leafs, Raptors, Marlies, and FC matches up with the key for the next two arrays. So what we're going to do is we're going to say let team equal teams of index path dot row to get that row number for the current cell that we are trying to display right now. Now what we're going to do is set the team name. So we'll say table cell dot team name dot text is equal to team. All right, so we have that in place. Now, we'll do the tickets remaining. So I'm going to say, I want to append the word tickets remaining to each value that's populated. So I'm going to say let tickets equal tickets remaining with a hyphen and extra space. So now I can say table cell dot tickets available dot text equals tickets dot appending. Notice that used to be like string by appending format or string by appending string in Objective-C. They've reduced it down to just the word appending because they realize, well, we know it's a string. We know we're doing a format. We'll just pass it in as an argument. So we're going to use appending format. And our format will be just %d. And our argument, like for printf, will be number of tickets of team. And it'll complain because it wants an optional there to unwrap. So when I click on the helper, it's suggesting an exclamation mark right there. So let's just we'll just oblige it. And then finally, our logo. So we're going to say table cell dot logo dot image is equal to, and we're going to say logos of team. Finally, return table cell. So that error goes away. All of my errors have gone away. I now have a clean table to launch. So let's hit buy tickets, and all of my cells pop up. Hit back, we know my back button works. So now the next step is to get the popover working for did select row. All right, so now the next step is to get our event handler going. So I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw in the event handler first, right below self row at, just so we have it in place. Right, so we're going to say did select row at index path. So we'll just empty that out. So it'll just be an empty method, and we'll come back to that. So now our goal is to get the popover up and running. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a new view controller. Right, we'll bring it into our storyboard, and we're also going to bring in a class for it. So first thing I'll just do is add my new file for it. So I'm going to right click on view controllers and say new file, iOS Cocoa Touch class, and this one will be called buy tickets view controller. So it's going to be a subclass of UI view controller. So we'll call it buy tickets view controller. So the idea is that this view controller, this little popover, will be like a little mini order form, right? So you'd add in like your name, PayPal ID, for example, or credit card number, quantity of tickets, and so on, and hit submit to purchase. So that's the idea. But what we'll do is we'll just keep it simple. We're not going to add all that extra stuff. So we'll give it a home for this view controller. So we have buy tickets view controller. And we're going to leave it empty. Now typically when you add your order form, you'll probably want to create your functionality for that popover. You'll put it here in this buy tickets view controller. But we're not going to do anything with it for this exercise today. What we're going to do instead is we're going to jump back to our storyboard, our main storyboard. And we're going to add a new view controller. So we have here home page, Google search page, buy tickets page. I'm going to throw it around here. And bring a new view controller in. Throw it on. But I'm not going to add any segues to it. So it'll just be a standalone view controller. All right, just a standalone view controller. What I'll do is I'll cast it to buy tickets view controller. So at least I have that. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the size of this view controller to something smaller. Now to do that, I have to change the style of it. So it can no longer be size inferred. I'm going to switch that size inferred to freeform, so I can reduce that size. All right, so it won't try and follow along with the previous view controller size and go full screen. I don't want it to go full screen. I want to keep it small, so at least we can see the back of it. So then what I'll do is I'll switch over to the size inspector. Right, and I see 375 by 667. I'm going to change that to something small, like 250 by 400. Something small. A little view controller there. I'll move it closer to the buy tickets area. Now what I want to do is I want to really make it stand out. And you could configure, you can put like an image as a background and make it look pretty and stuff. I'm going to just change the color of it. So going back to my attributes inspector and clicking anywhere on this view controller, I'm going to change that background color from white to like something beige or off-white, just to make it stand out. And at this point, you would create a whole order form, name, PayPal ID or credit card, submit, cancel, quantity, all those different things. I just want to put the label order here, just to signify, hey, this is an order form. Center that. Say order here. And even like change the color. There. So we can increase that font. There. Now there's one more setting we're going to add. Because we don't have any segues attached to us, we need to give this view controller a special ID label so we can call it up in code. And what we're going to do now to call it up in code is switch back to view controller, so the yellow circle, highlighting that, going to our identity inspector where we subclassed, and we already subclassed as BuyTickets view controller. Below it is storyboard ID. So give me a little ID label so that we can call it up in code. So I'm going to call this label the same name as my view controller. I'm going to say BuyTickets view controller. Make sure I spell it correctly. There. So BuyTickets view controller. It'll even check off use storyboard ID. All right. So at this point, I pretty well have everything completed I need for this view controller, sorry, for the storyboard. Now the final step is to get this to appear in code. So switching back to Teams view controller, and in particular to our didSelectRow method, what we want to do is we want to populate the code here for getting that popover to appear. But there's two things we have to do first. First, we have to bring in the delegate for popover. So we're going to move back to the top of the file and how we brought in UI table view data source and UI table view delegate. We're going to bring in one more, which is UI popover presentation controller delegate. Say that 5 times fast. All right, so we need UI popover presentation controller delegate because we need to bring in a special method. It'll be basically empty. It'll return nothing, but we just need it as a support method to get the popover to appear and disappear. All right, that's the main purpose of this additional method. So we can swing back down to our didSelectRow method. And just below it, I'm going to start typing in adaptive presentation style for controller. Right? And so the code for this method will just be return.none. Right, it's just a support method for getting that popover to appear and disappear. Now what we need to do is we need to bring in the code that we need to be able to get that popover to appear. So first thing we're going to do is declare our BuyTickets view controller object. So going back into didSelectRow, let's move it up there. So we're going to say let, call it BuyViewController equal, or sorry, extend BuyTickets view controller now equal. We're going to pull this from the storyboard, so we'll say storyboard exclamation mark dot instantiate view controller with identifier. And so now we'll provide that identifier we put under the storyboard ID. So we're going to say BuyTickets view controller. There's a reason why I just mashed it up to the name of the view controller so it's easy to remember. All right. As exclamation mark BuyTickets view controller. So casting it as BuyTickets view controller. All right. So at this point, we're basically instantiating BuyTickets view controller based on the characteristics of the BuyTickets view controller we dragged into the storyboard that we're going to pull from the variable storyboard. So once we have that, let's set the presentation style. We're going to say BuyViewController dot modal presentation style equal to dot popover. So it'll be a popover. Now we need the table cell. We need the table cell in particular that we're working with for this particular one. So whatever was clicked, we need that particular cell. So we're going to say let cell equal table view dot cell for row at, and then just passing an index path. All right. So we need the cell. So we have the cell that we're working with. We need that cell because we need the bounds and location of that particular cell. That's the main reason why we're pulling out the cell at this point. So to continue on, what we're going to do is we're going to create something called a popover menu view controller object. So we're going to say let popover menu view controller equal by view controller dot popover presentation controller. So we're just pulling out the actual presentation view controller object from by view controller. Now we're going to configure it. So first thing we're going to do is configure the arrow that will appear. So we'll say popover menu view controller dot permitted arrows. So permitted arrow directions equals .any. Then we're going to say popover menu view controller dot delegate equals self. So just attaching it to ourselves. Then we're going to set the source view. So where exactly to place this, we're going to say popover menu view controller dot source view is equal to cell. And then finally popover menu view controller dot source rect is equal to cell dot bounds. Now we'll let it complain and we'll ask for its guidance. It'll say add an extra exclamation mark. All right, and then the last thing is just present it. So get it to display. So now we're going to say present. By view controller, animated is true, completion is nil. And now you can give this a try. You should be able to see the popover appear. All right, so we're going to buy tickets, Marley's, and here you go. Order here appeared. Notice a little arrow just above. It's in white. It's very challenging to see, but it has the arrow as well. Click away to make it go away. Click on Raptors. There's our little arrow there. Make that go away. Right? So there. So in this app, what we covered was first not only an introduction to Swift, getting used to the UI kit for Swift. We got used to UI web views and getting an activity indicator to work. Then we got a table view up and running. Got to display our 5 Toronto sports teams with logos. We learned about logo catalog and asset catalogs rather, bringing our images into an asset catalog. Created dictionaries, created arrays, brought in the support methods for the tables so that we're able to get a table to display. And finally, popovers, getting a popover to display. So creating one and getting it to display, and pulling a view controller out of a storyboard. So that's what we covered with this application.